Good morning, and welcome to today's virtual event. My name is William Wechsler, and I'm director of the Rafik Hariri Center and Middle East Programs here at the Atlantic Council. I'd like to begin by thanking the Embassy of the Republic of Kazakhstan to the United States and the U.S. Department of State for their partnership on today's event. The topic of today's discussion is really important. It's at a basic level, what happens when a war is over? Um, Quite often, it means that the challenges have just begun. And one of those important challenges is the repatriation of foreign fighters. Um, Countries in Central Asia and countries all around the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Europe, are right now having to confront the problem of how to deal with those foreign fighters from their own countries who traveled to Syria and Iraq in recent years to fight with the Islamic State and other groups. Kazakhstan has emerged as a global leader in repatriation efforts for foreign fighters returning from Syria, having repatriated nearly 600 of their citizens, mostly women and children, through the Zhusan operation that brought them back to the green grass of home. Kazakhstan's approach and success on this issue may serve as a model for other nations who are considering how to take on this humanitarian and security challenge. Our panel will focus on the Kazakh example, why Kazakhstan's leadership made the decision to repatriate its citizens, how they went about it, and the lessons to be learned that can apply potentially to other countries from Kazakhstan's progress. For our US audience, we're particularly interested in hearing about how the United States government can be a good partner to support these kinds of efforts. To that end, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists today, starting with Deputy Minister Yerzhan Ashykbayev, who has held its position as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan since 2013. Previously, he served as Deputy Head of the Prime Minister's Office, Head of Foreign Policy at the Office of the President, and Head of the Foreign Minister's Chancellery. Next, we have Chris Harnisch, who's the Deputy Counterterrorism Coordinator for Prevention and Detention at the State Department, where he's responsible for developing and implementing strategies to counter terrorist messaging and recruitment, including terrorist use of the internet. He also oversees terrorist detention policy. Before this job, Chris served as Director for Transnational Threats and the Director for Afghanistan at the National Security Council. Now, we're always fortunate to benefit from the expertise of Ambassador John Herbst, who's Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador Herbst served for 31 years as Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Department of State. He retired at the rank of Career Minister. Among his long list of accomplishments is service as U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, where he helped enhance U.S.-Ukrainian relations, helped ensure conduct of a fair Ukrainian presidential election, and prevent violence during the Orange Revolution. Prior to that, he was ambassador to Uzbekistan, where he played a critical role in the establishment of an American base to help conduct Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. Next, we have Noah Tucker, who's a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. He's been a program associate at the Elliott School of International Affairs since 2016, and his current research there focuses on issues relating to violent extremism and human rights. Until January of last year, he also served as senior editor of the Uzbek service at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Relevant to this event, from 2017-2018, he was executive editor and head of research of the research team for RFE-RL's Not in Our Name project, which focuses on countering extremism in Central Asia. Dr. Steven Wein is a professor of psychiatry at the College of Medicine with University of Illinois at Chicago. He also serves as director of global medicine and director of the Center for Global Health there. For the past 25 years, he's conducted a program of research focused on trauma and migration impacted populations. His research mission is to develop, implement, and evaluate psychosocial interventions that are feasible, acceptable, and effective with respect to the complex real-life contexts where migrants and refugees live. This work has been supported by multiple grants from the US government and other state and private funders. But last but not least is our good friend Jasmine El-Gamal, a former Middle East advisor at the US Department of Defense, Atlantic Council non-resident fellow, who is going to serve as our very capable moderator today. Jasmine served previously in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Middle East Policy, where she handled the Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria portfolios. During her tenure, she covered issues regarding the Arab Spring, the Islamic State, Guantanamo Bay, amongst others. I'll now turn it over to Jasmine to start the discussion. Thank you very much all for your participation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Will, and thank you for everyone who's participating in the event today. I think this is an incredibly important topic that often does not get enough attention. So I'm really grateful to the Atlantic Council and the Embassy of Kazakhstan for putting on this event and for allowing us to have this discussion. A couple of quick housekeeping items for the panelists. When I ask the questions, I would be very grateful if you could keep your answers fairly brief so that we could get to everybody and also have enough time for the Q&A at the end. So about 2 or 3 minutes would be great. And if you start to go over, I will nudge you a little bit to wrap up. For the audience, at the end of the event, towards the end of the conversation, you're going to have an opportunity to ask your questions to the panelists. There are instructions. If you hover your mouse down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat window. And if you open that, you'll see a message from Adrian and the Eurasia Center with instructions on how to submit your Q&A. So please feel free to do so. We'd love to take your questions at the end of the panel. So without further ado, let's start the conversation. I'd love to start with Deputy Minister Ashykbayev. We have seen a number of countries refuse to repatriate their citizens, their foreign fighters, women and children who are now stuck in Iraq and Syria, who went to fight in the jihad there with ISIS. And there are a variety of reasons why countries have refused to take back their citizens, but Kazakhstan has not. Kazakhstan has decided to repatriate their citizens and attempt to rehabilitate them. Can you walk us through the decision process that led your country to take such a step, given that it is quite controversial? And if there were any major obstacles that stood in your way at the very beginning, whether it was external pressure or domestic pressure, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, and I would like first and foremost to convey my sincere appreciation to the Atlantic Council for raising such an important issue, and I'm very much hopeful that today's discussions and conclusions we can draw would help other nations that, as you mentioned, are still refusing to repatriate their nationals with due respect to their national security concerns to implement similar repatriation programs like Kazakhstan did. So why this is important and how the process started in Kazakhstan? Well, there are several reasons for that. The ultimate decision was taken at the highest political level here. It was first sanctioned by, the decision of the first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, and the later phases of the repatriation operations were under the guidance of the current president, President Tokayev. And there are several arguments in favor of that. First, we as Kazakhstan are very much attentive to our international obligations. We take them quite seriously. Kazakhstan, by the way, served in UN Security Council, and one of the specific UN Security Council resolutions on the return of foreign terrorist fighters and their families was adopted during our term. So this is first issue. The first argument. The second argument is the repatriation operation was almost entirely humanitarian in its nature. So all in all, we repatriated over 700 nationals, of whom 33 men, all of them are foreign terrorist fighters, and all of them prosecuted. We're talking about 187 women and over 490 kids. So given the number of kids and women, this is a humanitarian operation, and most of these kids, we're talking about kids, foreign nationals stranded in different countries without an access to basic needs such as food, shelter, clean water, health, and education. So they were exposed to different types of threats, the violation of their rights, like abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation, and potential recruitment. So why we did that? I've been foreseeing this operation since early beginning, and we've been approached by a number of groups of relatives, of mothers, and by those women and even foreign terrorist fighters themselves, who were pleading, who were sending messages to their relatives or approaching or sending messages to government agencies with a plea to repatriate them. Most of them were disillusioned with the ISIS radical ideology, and well, we believed that as President Tokayev introduced the concept of listening state, which is to be responsive to the calls from the public, not only during election campaigns, which is so often the case, but continuously. So that was also a major factor. And then finally, I should also mention the identity issue, the nation building issue. Kazakhstan is among very few countries in the world which facilitates the repatriation programs of its compatriots. And for the past 25 years, we repatriated over 1 million of ethnic Kazakhs from different countries like China, Russia, Mongolia, Central Asian nations, Iran, and so on and so forth. And given that number, when we talk about some 500, 600 women and kids, we felt it was our moral obligation to bring them back to the country so they have a chance for the bright future.
Thank you so much, Excellency. I just want to ask a very quick question before we move on to Chris. When you talk about a listening state and listening to your citizens, are you implying or are you saying that the reactions of the citizens of Kazakhstan has generally been positive to the idea of repatriation? Because it's certainly not the case in European countries, for example. So was that something that you had to deal with? Just quickly, if you could answer that, and then we'll move to Chris.
Well, let us be frank. We cannot say that we had 100% support of the public, but given the history of Kazakhstan, given those repatriation programs we run as a government, and given the so many calls from the public, from the relatives on repatriation, and again and again we reiterate that we are out of 700 repatriated, 500 were kids, minors. We were talking entirely about these kids, and the message was well received by the society. Still, of course, there are still issues. Not everyone happy that the government pays particular attention to these groups, but overall support for the repatriation was quite remarkable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I do think it was quite a courageous decision by the government of Kazakhstan, and I hope to be able to go into some of the challenges and lessons learned for other countries later in the discussion. But for now, let me move to Chris. Chris, you and I have had multiple discussions about this over the years, and we've talked about how the State Department helps in these situations, what kind of assistance it provides, how it goes about these partnerships with countries that both are willing or not willing to repatriate their fighters. In the case of Kazakhstan, you had mentioned to me that this program was entirely Kazakh driven, but that they came to you and they said, you know, we need assistance. Let's see if we can work together to make this happen. Can you walk us through that conversation and help us understand from a U.S. perspective, from a partner perspective, how this process unfolded and some of the lessons you've learned from it?
Sure, sure, absolutely, Jasmine. Well, let me begin by thanking the Atlantic Council for hosting this event, thanking my fellow panelists, really an esteemed group of people, and especially thanking Deputy Foreign Minister Ashykbayev, a good friend as well as a real champion on this issue. So Deputy Foreign Minister Ashykbayev mentioned the moral imperative that he described, as well as the humanitarian imperative that he described for why Kazakhstan decided to repatriate. Let me just also mention that the security imperative for repatriation. There are right now over 2,000 foreign terrorist fighters in Kurdish prisons in northeast Syria, and that doesn't include the prisoners, the ISIS fighters that are from Syria or Iraq. I'm just talking those that are from other countries, like from European countries, Central Asian countries, whatnot, Middle Eastern countries. There's another 13,000 or so women and children in Kurdish-run camps. The concern is that from a security perspective, is that I'd be willing to go out on a limb and say that the vast majority of those individuals are not going to die in those prisons or in those camps. They're going to be free at some point, whether they escape, whether they're freed by ISIS fighters. ISIS has called for the liberation of the prisons and camps for some time now, and when or if those people are able to escape from the prisons and camps, they'll return back to the battlefield. They'll return to the battlefield either in Syria or to another battlefield in Afghanistan, Libya, a third country, or they'll return undetected back through the back door to their home country. So, so in order to secure that enduring defeat of ISIS, we think it's imperative that countries repatriate now when they have an opportunity to have positive custody over these individuals and are able to monitor them, as opposed to these people's returning back to the battlefield or slipping in through the back door undetected to their home countries. To your question, Jasmine, about the degree of cooperation between the United States and Kazakhstan, we've been calling on countries to repatriate FTFs and ISIS-affiliated family members for about 3 years now. And Kazakhstan was really the first country that stepped up to the plate. And when they did, and this was 2 years ago, it was almost exactly 2 years ago when they initiated their first repatriation operation. When they did step up to the plate, they didn't just dip their toe in the water. They said, we're going to bring back effectively as many Kazakhstanis as they could. I can't remember the exact numbers at the moment, but I think it was around 100 or so, which was just unprecedented. We hadn't seen any countries take back any FTFs or family members, but Kazakhstan said that they're going to take back a good number. So we said when Kazakhstan notified us that they wanted to move forward with this, we first of all, we were very grateful for their leadership, and second of all, we wanted this effort to be a success. So we had conversations with our counterparts of the Kazakhstan government and discussed how we could potentially collaborate to help build the capacity of Kazakhstan to make sure that individuals that are brought back to Kazakhstan are successfully prosecuted, incarcerated, monitored, and those that aren't prosecuted, that they're effectively rehabilitated, reintegrated. So, and when the Kazakhstanis mentioned that that's where they would like some assistance is on the reintegration and rehabilitation front. We dipped into our network of folks who have worked on these issues for some time in various conflict zones. One of those individuals is on the panel today, Dr. Steve Wein, who's just if I dare say, really a legend in this field. He's got just tremendous experience on this issue. So we were able to put him in touch with the Kazakhstan government, and really the partnership and dialogue began. And it's been an enduring one for the past 2 years. And I'm very pleased that we were able to announce an award for Dr. Wein to continue doing his work in Kazakhstan for at least another 2 years. And I'll just mention that Kazakhstan's not the only country that we're doing this type of work with. Really, any country that is bringing back, repatriating, rehabilitating, reintegrating, prosecuting FTFs, we're really trying to help out any way we can.
Thank you, Chris. And the question I want to ask just right up front, because I don't want to risk not getting to this question. in your experience, having worked on this issue with several governments, is this something that can work in any country, or is this, is this sort of decision specific to certain circumstances, certain countries, certain cultures? Is there something that differentiates Kazakhstan from other countries in Europe, for example, that haven't been willing to repatriate their fighters, or in your opinion, is this program something that can work across the board? What do you think?
This can work anywhere. This can work anywhere. This is a matter of political will, frankly speaking. Kazakhstan had the political will to do what was right 2 years ago and to continue doing what was right. Other countries have as well. Kazakhstan was out front, but a number of other countries, I'd say between 10 and 15 other countries, including the United States, have repatriated people. It's a matter of political will, and unfortunately, I think we see too many countries, especially in Western Europe, too many governments that just say, well, the risk is too high, or our electorates won't be supportive of this, or we might not be afraid what's going to happen. We're not necessarily afraid what's going to happen when these people come back, day one after they get back, but what's going to happen 1 year, 2 years down the road. Well, right now, I think we have anecdotal evidence with the Kazakhstani example that that you can do this, you can mitigate the risk. There aren't bombs going off in Astana right now, or Nur Sultan. They've been able to manage the risk. And by the way, it's not a small sample size that the Kazakhstanis have brought back. It's 600 or so. And frankly, if Kazakhstan can do it, countries that have the means, that have even greater means, such as in Western Europe, they should definitely be able to do this.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. Noah, I'd like to turn to you next. I know you've done a lot of great research on this topic and very familiar with the area and the region. Can you jump in and give us your thoughts on, this type of a program and this type of a challenge, not just in Kazakhstan, but across the Central Asian region? Where do you see possibilities here, and what are some of the challenges that you see that we should be digging deeper into, and especially other countries that might be thinking of doing something similar? What should they be worried about? What should they be thinking about? And what should they be optimistic about?
Oh, thank you. And thank you to the Atlantic Council again for organizing this. I think this continues to be a story that is not told enough. This is a remarkably, especially for this day and age, this is a remarkably good news story. I mean, not only was an incredible humanitarian operation carried out in spite of a lot of doubts, but it's been extremely successful up to this point. It really does. I just want to echo the statements of others that this really can serve as a model for other countries. And, I am not, I speak not as a diplomat, but as a researcher who has, very frequently across my career been extremely critical of CVE policies in Central Asia and even in Kazakhstan in the past. But this is a remarkable success, and this is a good policy that deserves emulation from its neighbors and from other countries in the world. And just on a personal note, I guess I would say I have met as part of my research with many of these families before their grandchildren and children were returned. And I've sat in their homes with them and listened to their stories and cried with them. And it is, again, unusual in these times in the midst of a pandemic and so many other things happening to have a really to have an unmixed good news story. And this is one of them. Some of the families that I sat with have had their loved ones returned to them as part of this, and who are living in safety now. And this is just it's a remarkable thing. And it took a lot of courage, and it shows that it's possible. So I want to echo as well the assessment that there has not been an increase in extremist activity. There hasn't been an increased threat level because of this. If anything, I think that this measure, and particularly the humanitarian nature of it, and the willingness to recognize returnees as people and as full citizens of the country, has gone a long way toward preventing future violent extremism, particularly as many of these people have been featured in media reporting and documentaries, and been allowed to tell their stories about what they saw in Syria and what happened there. And many of them are truly horrific. And for them to be able to come back and return and be welcomed back in their country is probably the biggest PVE victory that we've seen in Central Asia, certainly through this entire conflict. To answer your question about challenges that remain, things have been overwhelmingly positive for now. The challenges that stand in front of us are, where do we go from here? How do we build on this? How do we continue to ensure not only that those who are returned can be fully reintegrated and rehabilitated, but that we also can prevent this from happening again. And that's a longer term, form of this. But I think one of the lessons that we get from looking at Central Asia and at Europe are that there are community level issues here that have to be addressed. We see one of the characteristics of the Syrian mobilization from Central Asia is that it wasn't even or random. It wasn't as if people just came from sort of all over the place. In each of the Central Asian countries, as in many of the European countries, we see concentrated, what we call hotspots that show community level problems. And as we move forward, continuing the success that this policy has set up so far, it will be important to begin to address some of these community level issues in order to both enhance the probability of success for reintegration, but to ensure that these problems that helped facilitate some of this happening in the first place can be addressed for the longer term. This is not a challenge that's unique to Kazakhstan. No, this is a problem that we see across the region and, in Europe as well, and something to think about forward. But, the most important thing that we have now is that we've seen that this can be successful and that we can move on to that medium and longer term thinking.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn to Steve now. Because, Steve, you're a psychiatrist. You visited the program in Kazakhstan, but you also have worked with children in particular. And you mentioned to me the other day when we were chatting about this, that you worry that some of these rehabilitation programs might be too security driven, or might tend to be kind of placed in under the category of law enforcement or security. Noah was just saying that one of the challenges is thinking about the longevity of these programs. Where do we go from here? How do we sustain them? How do we scale them? How do we import them? What are some of the lessons that you've learned from your work that might help answer some of the questions that Noah just posed about longevity and sustainability? And then also I want to ask, again, just because of your background in psychiatry, one of the things that the three panelists so far have mentioned is that, nothing bad has happened, this is working, this is not something to be afraid of. On the flip side, though, we can't really blame people in other countries or even in Kazakhstan itself who worry that, but what if that one person comes back and does something? What if more than one person? I mean, all it takes, right, is one attack from a returnee or someone who was thought to have been rehabilitated to really put a dent in the success or the progress of these programs. So how do you address the fears on that side? And how do you think governments can best approach their populations to help them be a little bit more tolerant to the risk, I guess, because perhaps the reward is so great, both to the individuals and to the community? So would love to hear some of your thoughts on that, Steve.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks to the Atlantic Council for inviting me. Thanks to the government of Kazakhstan and practitioners in Kazakhstan and and the State Department for allowing me to be involved in this important issue. You know, these are really challenging questions. I'll offer some perspectives on it. I think first, the Operation Zhusan is a remarkable operation. It's tried to do what no other country has done, but it is a humanitarian operation. It is a bit like refugee resettlement in some ways that we're familiar with, but it's also different because of the security issue that Chris was mentioning. You know, we have mothers and children here. Let's just focus on them. Some of those mothers were brought along unwilling to Syria. Some were enthusiastic and signed on to the project and are very invested in the ideology. We have children who we think of as victims here. And yet some of those children were involved in trainings, in ideological trainings. Some carried out operations or were trained to. We don't know what kind of agreements were made between parents and children before this about what to do in the future. So there's a real reason for concern. But there's also, I think, a very strong basis for hope that Kazakhstan has made the right choice, because, you know, society lives with lots of risks of criminal offenders, and these children are not, and mothers are not criminal offenders. Let's be clear about that. They have committed no crimes, and they're out in civil society. What we know from prior work in many other countries around, say, children who've been involved in crime, people have been involved in gangs, people have been involved in child trafficking or sexual exploitation, refugees of wars, is that people can come back. People can go on to live relatively normal, peaceable lives in civil society. And so I think what we need to do in the case of projects like Zhusan and other rehabilitation, reintegration programs is draw on the best knowledge, the best practices that we've learned from those programs. And what they tell you is, I think that some of the lessons learned are, one, that the commitment is long-term. So especially when we're talking about children, you know, I sat with children who are and played and drew pictures with them. These are preschoolers or in grade school. When would we possibly have to be worried about them as a risk of criminality or being involved in extremism? It's not till they're adolescents or young adults. Maybe the mothers we might be more concerned about in the short term. And so what we've learned from a lot of other work, and I'm also now thinking of the work with demobilized child soldiers, is that it takes focusing on multiple levels to mitigate against these risks. So I'm talking about promoting individual mental health and well-being, promoting family support, promoting educational success, promoting community support, like Noah was talking about, integrating them into a community so they're not stigmatized or bullied, improving structural conditions like housing, jobs, and promoting public safety. So it's working on all these levels that a program like what's happening in Kazakhstan is doing, and that's what needs to be done. It's not simply an issue of de-radicalizing or separating people from ideology. So for children, what does this mean? This means school placement. This means individualized educational programs, because many of these kids were out of school for many years. It means addressing neurodevelopmental problems, because many of these kids have had malnutrition, chronic illnesses, trauma, which have affected their brain development, honestly. So they have developmental delays. The work that my colleague Teresa Betancourt has done in Sierra Leone with, she's followed over 500 demobilized child soldiers for over 17 years now. The single best predictor of these children reintegrating into life was success in school. The thing that interfered most with success in school was children's post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma-related problems. So that's why we need to offer trauma-informed care to these children and to their mothers. And we need to equip teachers and parents of how to help children manage those kinds of things so that they can stay in school, be successful, graduate. That's their best pathway into normal society.
Steve, can I jump in to ask you just a quick question on that? Is there a certain, so if you again are a country that's looking at perhaps repatriating your citizens, and let's say you decide to start with women and children, are you saying that there is an age, there's a specific age up to which the risks are much lower than after that age? If you were looking at, okay, if we want to be super low risk, let's repatriate children up to a certain age. Is there such a thing, or is it just the sooner the better, but we should be doing it up to all ages, even in adolescence?
I think up to all ages.
Okay.
I think societies can handle up to all ages. We know from our work with refugees that it's a little bit harder for adolescent refugees to come into society because their adolescents have a tough time anyways. They're not quite they're not just big kids, and they're not yet adults. And so being in that transition is the same time that you enter into a new society can be challenging. But we have, Kazakhstan itself and many other countries have a great deal of expertise of helping young people manage simultaneously getting into school, adjusting to a new culture, managing trauma-related problems, and staying out of trouble. So I think it can be done. One of the interesting things I heard from many of the parents and teachers in Kazakhstan was they were most worried about the kids who were between like 10 and 14, because they were like old enough to have been actively involved in training and operations. And yet they're not old enough to be of age of consent that they would have been prosecuted, like some older ones. So what do you do with them? And interestingly enough, those kids have a kind of critical perspective. And I've sat with those kids and heard them say, hey, we just want to play soccer, or we want to be with our friends. We want to hang out with our grandparents. The thing that they were trying to do in the caliphate, that was a lie. That didn't work. And so our hope is that through just socialization with peers, and maybe the support sometimes of theologians or faith leaders who can teach them what the proper religion is, that they can just kind of move away from extremism and live normal lives.
Thank you, Steve. Let me go to Ambassador Herbst and talk about, look at this kind of from a broader perspective, Ambassador. If you've mentioned before, you've talked before about the impact that this has had on the Russian approach to the region, and how Russia has sort of come at the region offering support, offering help because of this, Islamic militant problem. How much of that is still going on? What impact does that have on Russia's role in the region? And when it comes to the U.S. role, and when it comes to the U.S. perspective regarding the Central Asian region, should this issue be a real priority for us, or do we have bigger national security interests vis-a-vis Central Asia that we should be focusing on? I mean, what's your sense of how big this issue is and how important it is really from a U.S. perspective?
All right. First, on the Russian angle, Moscow sees itself as the security hegemon in Central Asia. And their understanding with China lets Moscow take the lead in the region on security issues. And so they like to hype the issue of Islamic extremism as a way to enhance their own influence in Central Asia. Now, while I'm a little bit skeptical about Moscow's motivation, I think that Islamic extremism is a problem in Central Asia that we should help deal with, that the homegrown Islam of Central Asia associated with the Hanafi school has always been moderate going back many, many centuries. And in fact, Central Asia was a center of Islamic learning in the 9th and 10th centuries. And the Salafi form of Islam comes from the Hanbali school, which was never native to Central Asia, and it was an import, a nasty import, exported by the same folks who were exporting that form of Islam elsewhere globally. So we have in the past helped the countries of Central Asia deal with this, and we should continue. But it's not the only, and it's not even the principal concern that the United States should have regarding the region. It's very important that the stability of Central Asia, which is a great achievement of its nations, especially Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, as the largest countries in the area, is something that is very much in our interest. They're surrounded by great powers which have imperial designs, and we should be working with all of these states to help ensure their independence, their security, and their stability, which also has an economic dimension.
Thank you, Ambassador. I mean, what you're suggesting makes perfect sense, right? It's, on a macro level, ensuring that the United States continues to support and enable the stability of these countries, so that the problems that we're talking about at the micro level, the community problems that Noah mentioned, the psychological challenges that Steve mentioned, and those are the things that need space in order to be addressed, and that space can only come from a stable environment. On one hand, and then on the micro level, to continue supporting and encouraging the programs that Chris has been working on with his department at State, because those are the things that help on a day-to-day basis. So thank you.
This program is enlightened. It's very, very smart, and it meets all of our interests regarding Islamic activism in Central Asia.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, that ends my part for now. I'd like to move to the Q&A. We have a few questions from the audience. I will try to combine some of them because some of them are similar. I'm going to start with Mr. Minister. We have a couple of questions from the audience. One is, what, in your experience with your foreign fighter population, what is it that led people in general to want to join the ranks of ISIS and to join this fight? What have you found from your experience? And then based on that, what did you see as the best method of disengagement or de-radicalization? What are some of the things, out of all the things that Steve mentioned, what were, a couple of things that you really focused on? And then lastly, how do you prevent people who have returned from re-engaging again with extremism, with extremist groups, or with this very same people that they were fighting with before? So if you could take those questions, and I apologize, but if we could keep it fairly brief so that we can try to get to more questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
You packed several questions and you want...
I know, the moderator is always the worst person. I apologize.
Well, basically, the reasons for them, for their intention to join the ranks of ISIL or to contribute to the caliphate was almost the same as in any country. There are 80 plus countries that whose citizens travel to the territories of Syria and Iraq, and they were not finding enough attention to their needs, and a lot of impact was from the propaganda, is pro-Islamic radical propaganda was also a case. then when what is the government, what government is doing to prevent from re-engaging? Well, there are a lot of issues that are on the agenda, and of course, even though this is a national repatriation program, I should reiterate that it has definitely a spillover impact and international, not even regional, and international importance, as Kazakhstan is a peaceful society, and we don't have an experience, we didn't have an experience of dealing with those traumatic cases with kids who were parts of insurgents or some military operations, and capacity building training exercises were of great importance for us. What government does is we would like to see them normal citizens. We don't want to treat them as heroes. We don't want to treat them as victims, but rather we want to see them normal parts of our society, members of our society. And in order to do that, we are trying to address all that sets of problems, be it medical issues, educational gaps, psychiatric assistance, social help, employment, all those things that distinguished panelists mentioned. Of course, sometimes those programs are too security driven. However, you can hardly think of what's going on in one's head. It's basically ongoing long-term fight for the hearts and minds of those peoples. I always give an example that during one of the repatriation programs, women brought some propaganda materials hidden in the toys of her daughter. So you never know what can happen. And definitely, personally, I think that there will be failures. There will be some percentage of those returning to radical ideology. We have to be realistic. But overall, and we've seen that from ongoing data that we have, most of women are renouncing that radical ideology. Some of them even embracing much more completely different type of behavior in the society. And for the kids, well, we have to work not only with them, not only with the families, but with communities. And this is extremely difficult task. And it's a multi-year task. So keep engaging with those groups, with those kids and women, trying to engage them in all types of activities, in all types of social programs, and not let them slip back to those conditions that were previously conducive to their radicalization is our major task.
And just very quickly, before I turn to Chris for a couple of questions, is it fair to say, sir, that is it fair to deduce from your remarks that, you know, this hasn't been an unbearable burden in terms of resources and capacity for Kazakhstan? Is this something that has been, you know, fairly doable in terms of the resources that you've had to spend on it, or have you struggled with resources given the number of people that you've repatriated?
Well, we are a nation of 19 million, and of course, 700 returnees may seem a small number, but again, we are talking about community-wide policies, and to avoid stigmatization and alienation of these groups, we need to treat them as equal equal in rights and equal in responsibilities. So basically, it may seem as very small funding is needed to address those concerns, but we cannot single them out. And all those social issues, unemployment, unfortunately, during COVID pandemic times, those are universal issues, and not only they are suffering, but other groups of the society are also suffering. So we can't even give you exact figures of how much is needed to de-radicalize, to re-socialize one single person.
No, that's an excellent point, and thank you for framing it that way, because it really reiterates the point that as Steve was saying, that and as Noah was saying, this is a holistic process. There's no such thing as de-radicalizing someone, like you put them in some sort of machine or something and they're de-radicalized. I mean, it really is something that requires multiple steps, and like you said, requires treating them not so different from anyone else who has a lot of these grievances as well. So thank you for that. I want to quickly turn to Chris because we don't have that much time left. Chris, I'm going to give you a couple of questions, and it really has to do with the challenge of dealing with other countries that are less willing to take this step. So one person asked about Russia and the fact that if Russia were to repatriate its citizens, it would really take a load off of it would take a lot of people off the battlefield, so to speak. So how can the international community encourage Russia to take a more proactive role on this and lead by example as well? Relatedly, someone asked about, someone mentioned all of the reasons Canada, for example, has given for not repatriating their citizens. And you and I have talked about this. So the lack of Canadian consular presence, this is something that we've heard from multiple countries. The difficulty in translating intelligence gathered in the field, so not being able to prosecute them if necessary when they come back. And so on and so forth. I mean, there are all of these reasons that other countries give for not being able to repatriate their citizens. So you don't need to single out any one country or the other, but just to answer this general question, what is it that the US, in partnership with countries like Kazakhstan, who have had, this successful experience with repatriation, is there really anything that can be done to convince some of these countries to change their mind about repatriation?
Thanks, Jasmine. Let me address the Russia question first. So Russia's gone to great lengths to undermine our democracy in the United States, and they've gone to great lengths to promote misinformation and disinformation regarding Islamist terrorism. However, one issue where we do see relatively eye to eye with Russia on is this issue of repatriation, and I've got to give credit where credit's due. Russia has called on countries to repatriate, and they've taken some initial steps themselves. And I hope sincerely that Russia continues to repatriate its citizens and does so in a humane manner. By the way, that's critical, that they must do it in a humane manner. To your question regarding other countries and some of the challenges that they face, look, I won't I'm not going to mention any specific countries, but other than to say that there are a handful of Western European countries, 2 or 3 in the past month, that have started repatriating women and children. Those countries, a year or two ago, had the same list of challenges that you mentioned in your question regarding consular services, regarding logistical support on the ground. They were able to get it done. They can work through the United States. All these Western European countries know that the United States has a presence on the ground, and we've offered our good offices and in some cases the support of our military to help out on these repatriation efforts. And then finally, one thing I do want to address real quickly is the question that you raised to the Deputy Foreign Minister regarding how we can prevent people from re-engaging. Look, I think it would be intellectually disingenuous for us to say that there is a foolproof way to prevent people from re-engaging. The fact is that when you repatriate people who have been radicalized, you assume risk. Countries will assume risks, but we need to weigh what the risk of repatriation is versus the risk of keeping these people in northeast Syria in camps where they continue to get radicalized by their mothers, many of who are still loyal adherents to ISIS, where they don't have access to an education system, social services. I'd say that the risk of keeping these people in the camps are a lot greater in the long term than the risk of bringing people back right now.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that is such an important point. And I'm so glad that you ended your remarks with that, because, you know, as with anything, there's risks to everything. And but there are risks on both sides. So what is the risk of doing something versus the risk of not doing something? And I think that that's really where, you know, I would hope the discussion to go as we move forward on this. So we have 3 minutes left. In those 3 minutes, I'm going to ask a quick question from someone who I think this can be a quick answer. Maybe Noah can take it. But before that, I did want to encourage everybody who's on the call. Steve shared an article in the chat that describes a framework for rehabilitation and reintegration. So I encourage everyone to look at that. I also encourage everyone to follow Steve and Noah and the Atlantic Council website, other expert pages. They have done great work on this. So for those of you who haven't gotten their questions answered, please know that you can go to Steve and Noah online and check out what they have to say about this. The last very quick question before I thank everybody for joining, if someone can answer this in 1 minute, what international organizations are currently assisting in the repatriation and rehabilitation effort? Can anyone just name a couple of organizations that are doing good work on this?
Well,
Steve?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Steve
ahead,
and Deputy Minister.
Out of our own experience, we're working with all types of UN agencies, UNICEF and others. We're working with ICRC, International Committee for Red Cross, and we're working with NGOs on the ground. So there are plenty of organizations. OEC is very much engaged in that work as well. There are plenty of them. So provided any country has political will, they can surely find the way to bring those kids and women back home.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, there are many willing partners with a lot of expertise, UN agencies, UNICEF, UNOCT, and many countries. A key issue is coordination, avoiding redundancy. And so the leadership of the government of Kazakhstan is helping with that. Like a lot of humanitarian emergencies, things can get crazy. And
right.
And so it's important to the government of Kazakhstan, which has been a leader in this space, keep things aligned to best support the interest of these young people. And I think it's very important to build a community of practitioners locally in Kazakhstan, regionally, internationally, so other people can learn from this experience and be able to help bring in and support kids and mothers in their countries as well.
Exactly. Great point, Steve. I think we're about at the end. Can someone from the Atlantic Council confirm to me that we are at the end of our session? We are. Okay. So very quickly, so a journalist from the Voice of America Extremism Watch Desk asked for the Deputy Minister about the exact number of repatriated Kazakhstan citizens so far, how many of them are foreign fighters, etc. I'd like to say to this journalist that we did discuss this. The minister mentioned these figures at the very beginning of the session, so you can watch the taped one, which I think will be available on the AC website, and you can get those numbers that way. Thank you again very, very much to all of the panelists for a really fascinating and important discussion. Mr. Deputy Minister, I really do commend you and your government for taking such a courageous step on such an important issue. Chris, the State Department has done great work with some of these countries to help support them, and I commend you for that as well. Steve, Noah, great job on this issue in terms of your research. I hope people can follow along. And Ambassador Herbst, of course, thank you for your comments as well. I hope the audience enjoyed this discussion and found it useful, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.